I woke up to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of Adrian singing off-key in the kitchen. Our two rescue dogs twirled around my legs as I padded across the cool tile floor, their tails wagging in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. It was my 38th birthday, and for a moment, the world felt soft and whole. Adrian set a mug in front of me with a crooked grin. "Happy birthday, Hannah. Survive work today. And then we celebrate properly." I laughed, kissed his cheek, and slipped into my coat. The winter air outside was sharp, carrying the scent of snow and city smoke. Downtown Chicago shimmered under a pale sun as I approached Mercer & Co., the glass high-rise that had defined the last 5 years of my life. I imagined a small surprise waiting a card on my desk, maybe a slice of cake from the admin team. When I stepped through the rotating doors, the lobby was quiet. No one said a word as I crossed the polished floor and rode the elevator up. The hum of the office was normal, but the stairs felt heavier. Before I even reached my desk, Colin Mercer appeared in the aisle like a shadow with a designer suit. His voice carried that familiar, insincere smoothness. "Hannah, step into my office." The glass walls reflected the whole floor as I entered. On his screen, the Ridgewood project plans glowed my name, stamped in the corner with a digital signature I had never given. My stomach tightened. He leaned back, lips curling into a smirk. "Do you like your gift? You're fired. Effective immediately." The words landed like glass breaking in a quiet room. Behind him, the plan file stayed open, my supposed approval staring back at me like an accusation. I said nothing. My silence was my shield. Colin waved a hand toward the hallway. "HR will process the paperwork. Leave your badge." I turned and walked out without a sound, past the receptionist's blinking confusion, past the birthday balloon tied to my chair. I entered the elevator and let the doors close on the floor that had stolen my mornings for 5 years. My reflection in the mirrored steel stared back, calm, almost cold. By the time the elevator reached the parking garage, the echo of his words had already shifted into something sharper, a quiet certainty that this was only the beginning. I sat in the underground parking lot, my hands locked around the steering wheel. The air was cold enough to fog the windshield, and for a moment, I just stared at the faint outline of my own face in the glass. My chest felt heavy, but the tears refused to fall. I picked up my phone and called Adrian. He answered on the first ring. "I got fired," I said. My voice quiet but steady. "Good," he replied without a trace of surprise. "It begins now." A shiver ran through me, not from the cold, but from the calm certainty in his tone. I exhaled slowly, letting the truth settle. As I drove out of the garage and into the snow-dusted streets, the city blurred behind me, block by block. The steel and glass towers gave way to quiet suburban streets, lined with trees heavy with frost. Our small ranch-style home waited at the end of a cul-de-sac, the place where my life felt real warm lights, 2 dogs, and the faint smell of pine from last night's fire. The past 5 years replayed in fragments as I drove. I had rebuilt Mercer & Co.'s project workflows from the ground up, streamlined every compliance process, and saved the company millions by preventing failed inspections. I'd stayed late through storms, missed family dinners, and buried my own ambitions to keep a sinking ship afloat. And yet, in the end, I was nothing more to Colin than a pawn he could sweep off the board. When I turned into our driveway, I noticed a courier van idling near the curb. A small package leaned against our front door, half buried in a drift of snow. The label read Mercer & Co. inside. The dogs barked and circled my legs as I tore the tape open. A thick envelope slid out, and my breath caught. It was a copy of the Ridgewood project approval, stamped with my digital signature and dated 2 weeks ago. I had never signed it. Heat flared in my chest as I held the paper. They hadn't just fired me. They were trying to bury me under their mistakes, leaving a trail that pointed straight to my name. I laid the document on the kitchen table, my fingers steady now, and reached for the folder where I kept my private backups. I spread the forged Ridgewood document across our kitchen table, the wood warm beneath my hands from the sunlight streaming through the window. The dogs settled at my feet as if they could sense the storm gathering inside me. Beside the envelope lay a second folder, one I'd kept sealed for years, labeled only with my initials, my personal insurance. I unlatched it and began to arrange everything in neat rows: emails, project logs, screenshots of every design I had ever submitted, 5 years of meticulous work, proof of every change I'd implemented to protect that company from itself. Each page was a reminder of the trust I had given and the loyalty I had earned the hard way. I could still remember my first week at Mercer & Co. Back when Gregory Mercer was in charge, he'd walked through the open office floor in a gray suit, stopping to ask about my first assignment. His voice was patient, measured, and warm. He looked at my preliminary design, nodded, and said, "You think like a builder, not just a designer. We need that." Within a year, he was consulting me on major projects, and for the first time in my career, I felt seen. Then the stroke happened, and Colin slid into power like oil seeping under a door. Everything changed. He cut the safety review team first, calling it unnecessary overhead. He canceled our legal checks for permit filings and started cherry-picking which of my reports to use, often dismissing them as too technical for clients to care. I watched the company's backbone bend under his shortcuts, and I bent with it, thinking I could still hold the walls up from the inside. Now, staring at the forged signature on Ridgewood's plans, I understood the truth I had been avoiding. He hadn't just pushed me out. He had weaponized my name, and in this folder, in my careful records. I held the key to undoing him completely. I stacked the evidence into a single pile, exhaled slowly, and felt a quiet steel settle in my chest as I slid the folder closer, ready for whatever came next. By late afternoon, the kitchen smelled faintly of roasted coffee and the remnants of the lunch I'd barely touched. Adrian popped a bottle of champagne, the cork bouncing off the ceiling with a cheerful thud that felt almost out of place. He poured 2 glasses, handed me one, and raised his own in a slow, deliberate toast. "To endings," he said, his eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction, "and to what starts in 4 hours. I arched a brow but didn't ask. The first sip of champagne was crisp and dry, and it spread warmth down my throat. Outside, snow drifted past the sliding doors, swirling in the dim orange light of the setting sun. The world felt oddly calm, like a held breath. Then my phone buzzed. Once, twice, 10 times. I glanced at the screen. 10 missed calls, then 12, then 20. I set the phone down on the counter, watching it vibrate across the marble like a nervous animal. By the time the call counter hit 40, Adrian leaned against the island, smirking. "Let them sweat," he said softly. I picked it up only to watch the notifications stack faster than I could read them. Office manager, compliance officer, department heads, even Colin himself. When I finally silenced it, the screen flashed a total of 98 missed calls. The voicemails began to download, and I tapped one. Susan, the compliance officer, sounded like she was standing on a cliff edge. "Hannah, please call back. We can't access the Ridgewood approvals. The city is asking questions. Darren Collin, he's losing it. Please, before it's too late." I ended the message and let the phone drop onto the counter with a muted clatter. Adrian handed me the second glass of champagne. I took a long sip, letting the bubbles fizz against my tongue as the first real flicker of satisfaction bloomed in my chest. Through the glass doors, the snow kept falling, silent and steady, while somewhere downtown, the empire Colin had stolen was starting to crack under its own weight. My phone buzzed again as another voicemail landed, and I set my glass down, ready to listen. By the time the last streaks of sunset faded behind the snow-covered roofs, the house had settled into a soft quiet. The dogs were curled up in front of the fireplace, the orange glow flickering over their fur. I sat on the rug. The Ridgewood document spread across the coffee table, while Adrian leaned back in the armchair with his laptop balanced on one knee. "I've been watching the Ridgewood filings for weeks," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Public records tell a story if you know where to look." I turned toward him, my heart tightening. What story? He swiveled the screen toward me. Permit logs, submission dates, and digital approvals filled the page. Highlighted in yellow was my own name, attached to a final plan I had never seen until today. "They used your signature," he said, "and they stripped out your safety measures, all the reinforced retaining walls. The secondary supports, they're gone." I stared at the plans, the altered lines, the corners cut so cleanly it almost looked intentional. My voice came out as a whisper. "If a single wall fails, if a balcony gives way, then you take the fall," Adrian said, his jaw tightening. "Legally, ethically, maybe even criminally. That's a $25 million urban housing project. Families would be living there. Kids." The room seemed to contract around me. Heat from the fire brushed against my face, but it couldn't thaw the cold coil of fury forming in my chest. Rage and clarity mingled until they were indistinguishable. "They wanted me gone," I said quietly, almost to myself. My fingers tightened around the edge of the forged document, the paper crinkling under the pressure. They thought this would erase me, but all they did was give me the perfect exit to bury them with truth. Adrian closed the laptop and leaned forward, his voice calm and deliberate. "Then we make our move, but not with anger, with precision." I looked at the folder of evidence, then at the firelight dancing across the walls, and felt the first true surge of control I'd had all day as I reached for my phone. City Hall smelled faintly of paper, old coffee, and the faint tang of disinfectant. My boots clicked against the linoleum floor as I followed the receptionist's directions down the corridor to the Department of Building Compliance. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving everything a harsh, clinical brightness. Renee Alcott met me at the doorway to her small office, her sharp eyes taking me in with a glance that missed nothing. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in a simple navy blazer, hair pulled back neatly, and carried the aura of someone who had seen too many shortcuts end badly. "Vera," she said, gesturing me inside. "Let's see what you've got." I laid my folder on her desk, my fingers steady as I opened it to reveal 2 sets of plans, my original Ridgewood designs and the forged submission Mercer & Co. had filed. Her gaze moved back and forth between the sheets, her expression tightening with each comparison. "And this digital signature," she asked, tapping the forged plan. "I was on vacation in Denver that week," I said, sliding over a printed email trail and time-stamped logins. "I can prove it wasn't me." Renee leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "This isn't just unethical, it's criminal. If those homes had been built, people could die." She turned to her computer and typed quickly, scanning the project database. After a moment, she frowned. 2 more forged signatures. She muttered, "Different employees, different projects. This isn't a one-time mistake." A chill ran through me, sharper than the winter wind outside. Colin's scheme was bigger than I imagined, and now the city would see it too. "I'm flagging Ridgewood for an emergency freeze," Renee said, her voice firm. No construction, no permits moved forward until this is fully investigated. When I stepped back into the cold Chicago air, snowflakes pricked my cheeks, but my heart felt steady for the first time since the morning. The quiet streets glimmered under the street lamps as I walked to my car. A single thought rising above the winter hush. Mercer & Co. had just lost control of the game, and I was holding the next move. The morning light streamed into my home office, warming the edges of the sketches and binders stacked along the walls. Sunlight traced over the blueprints pinned to my corkboard, reminders of the projects I had nurtured from concept to completion, only to be discarded when Colin decided he no longer needed me. My phone buzzed across the desk. Gregory Mercer's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a beat before answering. Hannah. His voice rasped, low and heavy with regret. I never should have handed him the company. I thought he just needed structure. I didn't see how reckless he was. The board is panicking. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of his words settle. They should be. He paused. We need you. I can authorize a consulting contract, full autonomy. You run point on all active projects, and we do whatever you say to save the firm. I glanced around my office at the folders of evidence and the Ridgewood plans still lying near my keyboard. Slowly, I began to draft my terms, each one a line of quiet leverage, independent authority, and full legal immunity. I said, Colin completes a full retraining program under my supervision, and no project moves forward without my digital approval. Not one. Gregory exhaled audibly. The board will fight, but they'll agree. They have no choice. When I ended the call, Adrian appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a thoughtful smile. So they're begging now. They want me to clean up the mess, I said, crossing my arms. He walked in, glancing over the spread of plans and notes. Then don't just clean it up. Build something of your own. You've been holding their world together for years. Maybe it's time you built one they can't touch. His words sank deep, igniting a quiet thrill that cut through the lingering anger. For the first time, I saw not just survival, but freedom, taking shape across the walls of my own home. The paperwork for Vera Integrity Systems was filed before the week was over. I signed the final document at a co-working loft that overlooked the Chicago River, the water glinting beneath a pale winter sun. The open space smelled faintly of coffee and sawdust, alive with the quiet hum of entrepreneurs tapping away at laptops. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking into someone else's office. This one was mine. The news about Ridgewood had already started to ripple through the industry. Two of Mercer & Co.'s biggest competitors reached out discreetly, their emails carefully worded but unmistakably eager. They wanted to know if I could review their projects before the city came knocking. They didn't want to become the next headline. I hired my cousin Rachel as my assistant, organized, sharp-tongued, and completely immune to corporate nonsense. A week later, a young software developer joined us to begin building my long-imagined verification tool, a system that could cross-check approvals and flag inconsistencies before anyone tried to cut corners. My old dream was taking form in real time, and it was mine alone. Meanwhile, Mercer & Co. caved. Gregory signed the consulting contract with all my conditions. The board, too, afraid of public collapse, to argue. But the signature didn't thrill me the way I thought it might. I no longer needed them. Their desperation was just proof that the balance of power had shifted permanently. One evening, as the city lights flickered on outside the loft windows, I stood with my arms crossed, watching the river darken and thinking about how far I had come since that birthday morning. Revenge wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was leverage, and leverage was quiet, patient, and undeniable behind me. Rachel was already scheduling calls for the next day, and the developer was sketching out the interface of our new tool. My phone buzzed on the windowsill with another news alert about Ridgewood. I reached for it. Knowing the storm I had started was only building toward its public reckoning, the Ridgewood Community Gym smelled faintly of snow-soaked coats and floor polish. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, their metal legs scraping against the tile as restless residents shifted in their seats. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, buzzing in time with the low murmur of voices. I stood at the long plastic table at the front, my laptop open, a projector displaying the first slide of the new public verification system. "Good evening," I began, steadying my voice. "I know you've all heard the reports. Ridgewood has been frozen while we rebuild the process from the ground up. Every step is now transparent. Every approval is logged and viewable on this dashboard." I clicked to the next slide, showing a sample timeline of inspections and approvals. A few heads nodded, but a hand shot up from the second row. A man in a heavy parka stood, his face lined with frustration. "I bought one of your houses last year," he said. "My roof already leaks." A wave of murmurs rolled through the gym. My chest tightened. This wasn't just about Ridgewood. Colin's negligence reached farther than I thought. I met the man's gaze. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. "And it's exactly why this system exists now, so it doesn't happen again. And so every corner cut is visible before it becomes your problem." Behind me, I heard a chair scrape. Colin walked slowly to the microphone, his face pale under the harsh lights. He cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "My name is Colin Mercer. I was acting director of Mercer & Co. I cut corners. I forged approvals, I ignored safety for speed, and I betrayed the trust my father built this company on." The room fell silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. "I am retraining under Ms. Vera," he continued, glancing at me briefly. "And I will do whatever it takes to make this right." The gym held its breath, a fragile mix of anger and relief hanging in the air. I nodded once, then stepped back to the table, ready to show them exactly how I intended to finish what I started. 3 months later, early spring sunlight spilled over the Ridgewood site, glinting off scaffolding and the clean lines of freshly inspected frames. Construction had resumed, but this time under triple oversight and a fully public dashboard. Every approval, every inspection, every material order was visible to the community. I visited the site once a week, more as a symbol than a necessity. The system was working, and it didn't need me hovering. Vera Integrity Systems had become more than a lifeboat. It was a flagship. 2 municipal contracts turned into 5, and then a state inquiry arrived asking for a proposal. My quiet home office became a nerve center. Mornings started with coffee, dogs curled against my feet, and emails from 3 new cities asking for demonstrations of my system. Every message was a reminder that the industry that once tried to crush me was now calling me to lead it. One morning, a formal envelope arrived. Inside was an invitation to join the National Safety and Compliance Board as a consultant. I stared at the letter for a long moment, letting the weight of it sink in. Not only had I outlasted Mercer & Co., but I was stepping into the very room where rules were written, the room Colin could never enter without me. That evening, I sat on the porch, the spring air soft against my skin. Adrian handed me a glass of wine and watched the sun drop behind the trees. "If you could go back to that birthday," he asked with a grin. "Would you change anything?" I smiled. The answer easy. I'd blow out the candle faster. Some gifts are meant to set you free. My phone buzzed against the arm of the chair. Another city wanted my system. I picked it up, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that what I had built was no longer a shield or a weapon. It was the path forward. I didn't burn the bridge. I built the road they all have to take.